So I just woke up from a little nap. I like my naps. But the reason for this one today was because I just literally did not get any sleep last night. I realized in the middle of the night that I had been out of one of my medications for the last couple of days. I take Gabapentin, and Gabapentin in particular for me is for my extreme itching that I've had for the last 25 years or so, almost since we got married. And I've been taking that for the last probably 2 years or so now. And it does seem to keep my itching down. But the other part of what Gabapentin will do, it's kind of a wondrous drug, honestly. But you definitely do not want to stop taking Gabapentin all of a sudden. And I'm not on a hugely, heavy dose, but I have had it long enough in my body. My body has clearly gotten used to it. And 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning last night, I'm just literally feel like coming out of my skin almost, just not only tossing and turning, but just unable to even find any type of peace in my body. It sounds weird, but maybe you can identify, maybe you can't. But I started researching Gabapentin withdrawals, and come to find out, everything that I was feeling and experiencing is exactly what happens when you stop taking Gabapentin suddenly. Now, it wasn't that I did it on purpose. We ran out, and typically we'll get those things filled pretty quick. But we just had gone a couple of days, and they were kind of weird, strange days, and it didn't happen. And my body really started to fight back, I guess you could say. It clenched up. It got very foggy, definitely insomnia last night, really feeling this sense of nothingness. And I've had these phases many times, and that's where there's also another prescription that I take that addresses a lot more of the firings in my brain that I refer to. But I had consistently been taking that, and so I thought that would bring enough consistency where I wouldn't spiral into this really semi-dark space that I ended up finding myself in these last couple of days. Let me be honest with you. I've run out of medication before, and I've realized that these medications are not meant to withdraw from quickly. And so it's not like I didn't know. It's just that I didn't care enough, I guess you could say. And that's one of the things that I want to address in this podcast today is medication. Now, in addressing this, I want to be very clear that I am not a doctor. I do not prescribe medication. I do not say that you should be on medication. If you feel that you are in a place that some type of medication could be helpful, and you've done your own study, you've seen maybe a series of doctors, then I would say, from my experience, it can actually become a very helpful tool to bring consistency and to bring some normalcy to and steadiness to where you find yourself to be mentally on a daily basis. Sometimes we have to take ownership of our own body. I had to take ownership of my own body, and I'm going to go back and share that with you here in a moment. But it's up to me to decide who I go see as a doctor. It's up to me to decide what I feel like is working in my body and not working in my body. And I don't believe that any doctor lives inside my body in such a way that they're able to tell what type of interactions are actually taking place within my body and brain. I am the one that is the manager of that. So that's been my encouragement to many people through the years is don't be afraid to find a doctor that is willing to have that conversation and is willing to, you might even say, experiment with you to see what different options are out there that might interact with your body and where you're at mentally. We're talking about restoring, in a sense, the brain and body back to the normal place that many people walk around with on a daily basis without the need for any type of supplement or medication. And that is only for you to decide, and that is only for you within your own body to know what that consistent feeling actually even means or feels like. You are the gatekeeper, and it is up to you to make proactive decisions if you want to bring that consistency about in order to find your new normal, you might say. So let's back up. Back when I was about 25 years old, picking up a little bit where my story left off last time, We had been married for maybe 5 years or so, and my mental OCD was beginning to really, really, really affect me. Now, it was very hidden, not that I was hiding it, but the struggles that I was having were internal. For the most part, my OCD and mental struggles have not had much of an external component to it, if you want to phrase it that way. What I mean is, let's take OCD in particular. Some people have an extreme OCD that is extremely debilitating, and a lot of it is external. So you see what this person is doing. The things that we've seen on TV or on the news would be some of the typical things, touching a doorknob 8 times before they can go out the door, turning the light on and off 8 times before they can actually turn the light on or off. My OCD has very seldom worked itself out in an external format such as that. Most of what I have dealt with over the last 30 years has been what I call mental OCD, which is very much internal and can be, in some ways, I think, harder to describe because there's very little external component to it. So when I was 25, these feelings, these urges, these dark periods were increasing. But I can remember my wife and I were getting ready to go to the movies back in the day when we used to go to the movies way before COVID, right? And I can remember driving down, I think we lived in Fresno at that point. I remember driving down the road and having a really, really tough day. But again, all internally. My wife, unless I would mention something, wouldn't really even know anything was happening. She began to see the signs the longer this went on that I would kind of disappear a little bit. My attentiveness would be lacking. I would be kind of stone-faced. I would be out of it, you might say. Blah. Very dry, very not anxious in like a scary anxious, but anxious in the sense of my brain is just so full, I almost feel like it's going to pop. And that's where I was at on this day. And I remember driving and saying, honey, all I know is I can't do this the rest of my life. I just can't. There isn't a way that I will be able to continue year after year after year with this type of internal mental torment. My body was getting so overloaded and drained by the end of a normal day. Now, again, it wasn't the doorknob or the light switch, but mentally it was something that was inside, maybe that's something that was said or something that I saw or something that still happened yesterday and it's still needing to be processed through my OCD algorithm, you might say. And from the moment I would wake up, I would begin to struggle with needing to, I guess you could say, solve these very complex mental things within myself. And the crazy part is, I've tried to explain this to other people, is when I would solve one, you could almost see it like a series of problems, math problems, let's say. And once one math problem, through a series of weird, bizarre algorithms that had to be followed in a certain way in my brain, once it would be, you could say, solved, then there would be a release from that particular thing, that particular attachment. But that would be, maybe there would be 60 seconds when it was really bad, and something else would plague me. So like in the analogy, another math problem would be presented in my brain that would need to be calculated. The algorithm would need to be figured out and solved in these bizarre ways. Again, not external, but internal. And the problem was that you would hope that, okay, I've solved that one now, maybe I can move on with my day. But when the episodes were really tough and bad and gnarly, these would start to stack up on each other. So math problem 1, I might have enough time to solve it, but if it was bad, I probably wouldn't, to be honest. And before math problem 1 was, let's say, solved and I was released from it, there would be the math problem number 2 that would stack itself on top. Well, I'm still trying to solve math problem number 1 and still kind of getting in a funk or in a darker and darker place mentally, where my brain is spinning faster and faster and faster like a computer processor, and I still am not getting the release from this first math problem. And now problem number 3 is sitting on top of problem number 2. But then again, when it was really bad, it would continue that way, and by the end of the day, I might have 10, 12, 15, 18, 20 different math problems, per se, stacked on top of each other. And I literally, in my brain, I can't go to math problem number 20 before I get through. You have to go in order. And so I may still be on problem number 6 at the end of the day, getting ready to try to relax, watch a TV show with my wife. But my brain can't stop. It doesn't shut off. And so I continue the night inside myself, working through these math problems, and I might be on math problem number 6, and I might go to bed. This is what gets really crazy. I might go to bed and still, maybe I solved 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10, and let's say I solved all the way through 15 by the time I went to bed, and I'm in agony at this point. It's excruciatingly dark, excruciatingly heavy, excruciatingly numb, and excruciatingly tiresome and draining. And so I am drained to the max at this point, and thankfully, I get to go to sleep. I can remember in those really, really dark seasons that 8 hours or 9 hours of sleep were at least a place for my brain and body to restore itself. It's like a computer being maybe plugged in because it's been processing information all day long, and it's hot and it's drained and it needs to, just sit on the charger for a while. Thankfully, I could sleep well. I could sleep 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, and I would sleep as long as I could because that's where the little slice of peace was found. And here's what's crazy, you guys, is I would wake up, and if I was still on 15 from yesterday, then my brain would oftentimes, if it was bad, it would still go back to 15 from yesterday and continue the processing of that equation, you might say. And so now I'm a day behind, and I'm on yesterday's 15, and I've got 20 from yesterday, so I've got 5 more from yesterday, but I've got now today, and they begin immediately, and they begin to stack up. And by the end of this day, I have, 43, and I've only solved yesterday's and 2 of today's. And then I get some peace, I go to sleep, and then I wake up. And again, if it stays bad continuously day after day after day for a longer period, you can see how crazy, gnarly, ridiculously draining and isolating this can become, because it could go day after day after day stacking up, and I might be 5 days in and still my brain has attached itself to 1 or 2 of the things from day 2 that still weren't solved, and all the others are just stacked on top of it, and I am, from the minute I wake up, incredibly overloaded. And even when I'm talking about it, I almost go back to those feelings of just feeling alone and feeling crushed and feeling numb and feeling isolated, feeling misunderstood, feeling like I can't live this way. I'm asking you, please don't write this off. This is real. What I've just tried to explain to you, some of you will be able to go, yes. Not that I feel exactly what you feel or felt, but I know exactly what you're talking about, because all of us that have something that's mentally not plugged in correctly in our brains or in our bodies, that is a commonality that we share. And for some, it comes out in depression. For some, it comes out in OCD. For some, it comes out in ADHD and bipolar and all these other diagnoses that we are throwing around these days. But at the end of the day, we all have something similar. It's outside of ourselves. And it's hard to explain. And it's isolating. And it's dark. And it doesn't feel good. And people that haven't experienced whatever it is for you have a hard time understanding what you're trying to explain. So I feel like there's more of a commonality between those of us that have some type of mental struggle than what we sometimes think. And I want to open up that discussion not just for those that struggle specifically with OCD. I want to open up the discussion to where we don't isolate ourselves either, that those that with OCD are the only ones that can identify or have this conversation that I'm trying to bring out, especially when it comes to faith and the mental illness that we struggle with. But I want to open up the possibility that all of us that have any mental struggle share a commonality that we need to be in this together. We definitely shouldn't isolate as here's the bipolar group, here's the ADHD group, here's the OCD group, here's the depression group, because then we're doing the very thing that our mental illness wants us to do. We're isolating ourselves with people that, yes, can identify with us, but maybe we're limiting what God would want to be teaching us through the struggle that we have. So let's turn a corner here. 25 years ago, I'm driving, we're going to a movie. I say to my wife, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Well, the internet was at its very early stages, and I've always loved technology, always tried to be at the forefront of new technologies. And so at its limited stage, I began to tap into what the internet had to offer at that point, which was research. Yahoo, Google didn't even exist yet, I don't think. And I started to research for myself, like, these are the feelings that I'm having. Is there anything that I can dig out of the resources that are now available to me that could make sense of this? And I started to discover, wow, at this point I didn't even know what OCD was. Maybe I'd seen it on a TV show or something, in the cases of touching a doorknob 8 times, but I didn't yet identify that to be what I was struggling with. And I can remember as I did this research, I began to listen closer to what my body was doing and saying and what it was responding to and the kind of the warning signs that would come about given certain circumstances or situations. And I started to, in a sense, I guess you could say at that point, diagnose myself. And I dug more and I dug more and I dug more. And then, of course, once you start to kind of feel some type of identification with what you're going through, you want to know, is there something that can be done? Is there someone to talk to? Is there some way that I can not fix this? Because it's not something you can fix overnight. Again, you're not going to take a drug that's going to mask it. That's not going to fix it. But is there something that is available that would maybe do what it needs to do? And I don't know what that is, but connect the things that are disconnected. And I remember I went to my doctor. Thankfully, I did have a doctor that was young. Not that he needs to be young or she needs to be young, but he was open to, listening to what I had to say and what the research that I had done, and wasn't just going to shoot me down and tell me what he thought. Again, your doctor is not your body. Your doctor is your doctor, but your doctor is not your body. You are the gatekeeper of your body and of your mind. And, I didn't have anybody telling me that, but I began to realize that this was true and began to, in those early stages, claim that to be true. Went to my doctor and told him what was going on. And so I shared with him, this is what I found. I would love to try something. I don't know what it is. I've never taken a medication in my life other than ibuprofen or whatever at this point. I know I've got to be proactive and figure out, well, what does that mean for me? What is there that is available to me that I can at least experiment with and try and see if my body responds accordingly. And my doctor was open to it. And so he prescribed my first medication. And he said, typically this medication in most patients would take 1 to 2, 3 weeks in order to kind of find its way through your body. And then at that point, you'll at least have a better idea if this is helping or not. And I was just so thankful that at least there was a chance. At least maybe there was something that could possibly bring about this stability that I was so longing for. This break for me, this peace inside such a dark, dark brain that had been running itself ragged for so many months and even so many years at this point, on and off. And so he prescribed the medication. I started taking it. And within, I'd say 2 weeks, 3 weeks, kind of as he had said, I started to notice, not, again, any feeling. This isn't a high. This isn't a euphoria. In fact, there is no feeling. And that's what makes it a little bit harder, because you're not talking about, oh, I have this new feeling that is better than the other feeling or the lack of feeling that I did have. That's not it. It was just this slow, steady stability. It wasn't overwhelming. It was just this new normal that I felt starting to come about in my brain, in the inner working of my body as a whole. And for the first time, I had hope. I had hope that maybe I wasn't going to have to live the rest of my life with the deep, dark mental anguish that I had been experiencing for, at that point, way too long. I was hoping that that was going to be the case. So you fast forward 1 year, 2 years. I ended up being on this particular medication, I believe, over 15 years. In those 15 years, not only were they considerably more stable years, mentally clear years, but in those years were when I began to find more of a comfortability to talk about what I was experiencing, because I was starting to discover that more and more people were experiencing something very similar or something with a commonality to what I was experiencing. And so the openness started to happen. I began to talk to people more openly about it. I began to share my story more. I began to let people in on what was going on in my brain. By 10, 15 years in, I wouldn't say I was an open book yet, to be honest. I would be selective as to who I was sharing my story with. But when I did share my story, I began to realize that, wow, 1 or 2 people out of most group situations would begin to respond and say, man, thank you for sharing that, because I'm struggling with this, or I'm struggling with that. And it's so great to know that there's somebody that can at least identify with me. And that would sometimes lead into relationships or further discussions that would be both an encouragement to me and, I believe, an encouragement to them. And that's ultimately what, now almost 30 years later, why this podcast was born. Because I want to be a good steward of my body and my mind, but also and the resources that I have, but also of the experiences, both good and bad, that God has allowed me to have. And I say allowed me to have. I've talked about that in other podcasts. I'm not going to go into that, but I do believe that God allows these things to happen. And am I saying by that? Go into one of my podcasts talking about spirituality and our mental illness, and you'll get more clarity on where I stand on that. I believe they can go hand in hand, and God uses them like a thorn in our flesh, as Paul talks about, to be able to mold us and shape us more so into his likeness. And that's what he's all about. And that's what this podcast is about. I want to be a good steward of my experiences so that you can in some way, or someone you know, can be encouraged and know that not only is there hope, there's hope in Christ, yes, but sometimes that sounds so cliche when our brain is doing things that feel so uncontrollable. And in those moments, what we need is someone just to come alongside us and say, hey, I love you. I understand in some form what you're going through. And this is not a spiritual issue. This isn't that you need to get better or closer to God. This is something that if you let it, can push you into the arms of Christ in ways that only this can do. So bottom line, I believe that God can and even desires to take our darkest, deepest, most tumultuous circumstances that feel so lonely, that feel so isolating, and He wants to not only restore what has been broken, give peace where we need peace in a supernatural kind of way, and that's not to be trite. He can do that. He does. He has for me in some of the darkest moments when I need just a light. Doesn't relieve the entire situation, but a light, a spirit of peace, a foundational truth that I can cling to. God is the provider of that. And ultimately, He takes it all and makes us more like Himself. And that is the goal. That is the goal of my life. That is the goal of your life. It should be. That is the goal and the purpose of existence, I believe. Whether we have a mental illness or not, it's just those of us that do, that is our place of drawing nearer to God. Flip the script a little bit with me and let God use the struggles in your life for His own glory. And that's not preacher talk. That's experiential talk. That's I know that it can happen talk, because it's happened for me. So let's end this. Medication, I do believe, is a path. It's one path. It's one tool that can be approached when the time is needed. If you feel that things are out of control, that your brain, again, is doing things maybe similar to what I've explained or someone else has been able to explain better for you, and you know that it is not a decision that you've made, or it's not just a bad day that you're having, it is consistently something that is ultimately firing wrong, then I would encourage you to see your doctor. And if your doctor isn't open to having that discussion, find another doctor who is. And again, you are, let's be clear, the gatekeeper of your body, the body that God has given to you. And the doctor himself is not your gatekeeper. So it is your right to find a doctor that will have that discussion with you and partner with you in discovery and see if there is something that can bring about this consistency, this normalcy, this solidarity that your brain and your body has been longing for, possibly for way too long. So guys, we are in this together. You are not alone. You are not isolated, even though you might feel like you are. The discussion is being opened up, and it is here for you to join in. I love you guys. I am with you. God is for you. You can do this. Do what you need to do to be the gatekeeper of your body. Love you. Until next time, be strong.